Then let me turn at this point to our first speaker for this morning, and plenary speaker, and I must say that it is a very special personal privilege for me to be able to introduce one of the founding fathers and guiding lights and great spirits of the system science movement going back to the early 1950s, and an enormous intellectual contributor to the system sciences. And to have him here makes this a historic occasion in itself, in my view. And it's with great pleasure that I will introduce to you Anatol Rapoport, Professor Emeritus at the University of Toronto, and the publisher, the author of many, many books. I won't take the time to list them for you now. But I'm sure many of you know the names of those books and have read them. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Professor Rapoport.
When I was a freshman, our physics professor, perhaps to make us feel at ease, told this story. The physics course was described in the catalog as non-mathematical. On the first day of the semester, the professor, after saying hello, turned his back on the students and, starting at the upper left-hand corner of the wall-wide blackboard, covered it with equations, finishing promptly after 50 minutes at the lower right-hand corner. Someone ventured to point out that the course was listed as non-mathematical. The professor looked at the questionnaire and then at the blackboard and said, "You don't see any integrals, do you?" Indeed, the integral is a fitting symbol of serious mathematics. Being related to making a whole out of parts, it is also a fitting symbol of the system outlook. It was at one time, and I'm told it still is unofficially, the logo of the Society for General Systems Research. As the last survivor of the four founders, I am at times honored by an invitation to give the opening address of meetings such as this one. This time, I will begin by identifying the themes that initially inspired each of the four of us, and how these themes are reflected in today's scientific and political activities. The name general system theory is usually credited to Ludwig von Bertalanffy, who called attention to processes apparently involving equifinality, that is, the attainment of a particular final state in spite of external disturbances impinging on the dynamics of the process. In this way, Bertalanffy refuted the contentions of the vitalists that only living organisms are capable of exhibiting equifinality. And that is apparently a purposeful behavior. Ralph Gerard was concerned mainly with the integration of biological and social disciplines. He illustrated this integration by a matrix whose rows represented levels of organization with which the disciplines were concerned: cell, organ, organism, group, society, international system, and whose columns represented the three main aspects of organization: structure, behavior, and evolution, or being, acting, becoming, as Ralph used to say. My interests at that time revolved around structural as distinguished from metaphorical analogies between apparently disparate phenomena revealed by mathematical models of these phenomena. For example, the behaviors of a harmonic oscillator on the one hand, and an electrical system involving an alternating current, an inductance, a resistance, and a capacitance in series on the other, are both describable by the same linear differential equation of the second order. Thereby, the inductance of the electrical system is seen as an analog of the mass of the mechanical one. The resistance of the former is parallel to the friction of the latter. Capacitance of the former is an analog of the inverse rigidity of the latter, and so on. Similarly, the insight that the same process, namely oxidation, underlies the rusting of a nail, the burning of a candle, and the breeding of an animal. It's an example of integration of knowledge, the process that makes science resemble a cathedral rather than a pile of bricks. The most significant of these approaches, all of which are aspects of integration, was, in my opinion, that of Kenneth Boulding, who distinguished 9 levels of system complexity. 1, a system characterized by structure but no dynamics. 2, a clockwork, being a structure of rigid dynamics insensitive to inputs. 3, a cybernetic system containing internal feedback mechanisms. 4, an open or self-maintaining system. 5, a genetic societal system typified by a plant, that is, a collection of differentiated, mutually dependent parts, like roots, leaves, seeds. 6, an animal capable of quasi-teleological, goal-directed behavior and beginnings of self-awareness. 7, the human level, where self-awareness develops into reflection. And I mean reflection written with an X, not with CT. There's a difference. Reflection with a CT is the mirror image. Reflection with an X is an internal process. So that's the human being, characterized by reflection, plus communication by symbolic rather than signal language. 8, human social organization, capable of planned and conscious cooperation. And being a devout Christian, Boulding added 9, transcendental systems, containing ultimates, absolutes, and inescapable unknowledgeables. In reference to these, Boulding adds, it will be a sad day when nobody is allowed to ask questions that don't have any answers. It is easy to see that this hierarchy reflects sequential expansion of the system concept. In other words, expanding integration. The geosphere has structure only. The hydrosphere and the atmosphere include dynamics. The solar system is essentially a clockwork. Living systems exchanging matter and energy from the environment become self-organizing systems. Human societies are consciously cooperating systems. I would make only one substitution. Instead of Boulding's transcendental system, I would supplement the geosphere, the hydrosphere, the atmosphere, and the biosphere by the noosphere, N-O-O sphere, a term introduced, I believe, by the Russian scientist Vernadsky, 1863 to 1945. It includes all human knowledge, true, doubtful, and false. It becomes a self-organizing entity to the extent that knowledge becomes integrated into a system, which is the clearest mark of scientific knowledge. It is this integration by generalization inherent in the scientific method that inspired the use of the integral sign as the logo of the Society for General Systems Research. I tend to think of the integration principle not only in epistemic but also in political terms. Consider the evolution of human society. Surely, the first cooperative groups were families. In time, families joined into clans, clans into tribes, tribes into nations, nations into alliances. The final integration of humanity is already visible on the historical horizon, however, in two forms. One portends further integration with all life, enhancing the life expectancy of the supersystem, that is the biosphere. The other appears to many as a threat, portending the extinction of at least our species within a time span of the order of centuries, perhaps even decades. Here's why I feel that way. The process of successive integration of human groups was driven primarily by enmity towards other groups. Contexts between separately organized groups were typically collisions, generating conflicts over territory, resources, later over domains of political control, spheres of influence, and so on. So two opposite processes went hand in hand. Internal integration, enhancing cooperation, and external differentiation, the use of this enhanced cooperation against a common enemy. Strong loyalty towards us ignited fierce enmity towards them. We observe the same dichotomy in the meaning of globalization. One envisages it as free universal cooperation, the other as unimpeded competition. One envisages the global village as a community, the other as the global market, resembling a Hobbesian war of everyone against everyone, except that the participants are corporations instead of people. The defeat means going broke instead of getting killed. It is this apparently less lethal version of the Hobbesian struggle for existence that makes it acceptable to those who see competition as the prime mover of progress. I say apparently less lethal because the lethal consequences of uninhibited competition are either not realized or ignored. The profit motive conspicuously overrides all others. Maximization of profit induces unimpeded growth, which suggests an analogy with malignant subsystems of the systems in which corporations are embedded, namely the human race. The potentially lethal consequences of corporate globalization have become apparent in the light of the vastly expanded noosphere, especially in the 20th century. It is clear that free movement of capital facilitates evasion of any form of control over the activities of corporations guided primarily by maximization of profits and imperatives of growth. Formidable political obstacles generated by corporate imperatives bar the way to conservation of non-renewable resources, towards impeding the degradation of the hydrosphere, the atmosphere, and the biosphere. The lure of cheap, politically impotent labor preserves or aggravates gross social inequalities on the global scale, those igniting outbursts of violence. These outbursts block integration of humanity on the basis of universal cooperation, and thus inhibit respect that ought to be rendered by humanity to its supporting systems: the geosphere, the hydrosphere, the atmosphere, and the supersystem, the biosphere. In conclusion, let me cite another remarkable insight of Ken Boulding that has a direct bearing on the system view of humanity. Ken distinguished three modes of social control: threat, trade, and love. Threat characterizes dictatorships and autocracies. That is, do or don't do this or that, or else you'll be punished. This mode is based on instilling fear in the governed. Trade characterizes modern liberal democracies. Do this for me, and I'll do that for you. This mode is based on people's immediate self-interest. Love characterizes the integrated, fully cooperative society. People are nurtured, cared for, and so on because they're members. We take care of our children not because they threaten reprisals if we don't, and not because they pay for our care, but because they're our children. I see the three modes as representing three levels of morality. Trade is more moral than threat, and love is more moral than trade. In the context of relations between the sexes, I regard prostitution as more moral than rape, and monogamy more moral than prostitution. In the context of politics, I regard democratic capitalism as more moral than totalitarianism, and democratic socialism more moral than capitalism. Later, Boulding replaced love by integration, probably feeling that sentimental overtones are out of place in academic discourse. And it is about integration, the key concept of system science that we have been talking about. I may mention in passing that this word is also semantically related to integrity. I thank you.